Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. And today's episode is Merlin Season 3, Episode 1, The Tears of Uther Pendragon. The episode in a nutshell is a brief summary of what happens within the episode. So in this episode, it is a double-length episode, so the summary may be a little bit longer than usual, but I'm going to try to keep it maybe even a little bit more brief than usual, so it's not too much longer. So first, we start with Arthur and the knights at a battlefield where there seems to be quite a few people lying on the field. And then we have them wandering through the forest, arriving at a camp, and they once again are attacked at this camp. However, once they fend off the attack, Morgana, who it's noted was missing for more than a year, makes her way out of the woods looking a little bit rough. And so they bring her back to Camelot. Merlin, of course, is worried because the last time he saw Morgana, he had poisoned her, so he's worrying that she's going to basically tell everyone what he did. However, when he meets her with Arthur, she holds him back before they leave and basically tells him that she understands why he did it and basically says that she's seen the worst of the world and she forgives him. So this puts his mind at ease. He ends up being a little bit happier, in a better mood. But then Uther starts to lose his mind. We, as the audience, see that Morgana goes out of the castle, sneaking out at night, visits Morgause. Morgause uses mandrake, which she puts into a potion, gives this to Morgana. Morgana puts it under Uther's bed, and this basically is explained that magicals can hear the cries of a mandrake. However, for non-magicals, they can't hear the cry, but the cry will basically twist their mind and their soul and invade their psyche. And we do see that Uther first has a vision of Igraine in the well after the banquet to welcome Morgana back, and then we later see him in the throne room where he has a vision of a drowned boy. And everyone starts to worry about this, to the point where Gaius even suggests to Arthur that he and the other members of the court would like Arthur to take over as regent, at least while Uther is incapacitated. However, Arthur is dead set against this as long as his father is alive. He says that he will not usurp power from his father. So that side fails. Then Merlin, while he's taking care of the king who's clearly having a nightmare, he notices some black goop dripping down under the bed. And he basically, while bending down to look at it, hears somebody come into the room. So he hides under the bed, sees somebody take the mandrake root, glances out from under the bed, realizes it's Morgana, and he follows her into the woods where she meets up with Morgause. However, it's there that she reveals that she knew he was following her, and so Morgause and her men are able to take Merlin captive. Morgause questions Merlin about why he's so loyal to Arthur, and, kind of indicates that she knows there's something about him, but not what it is. She doesn't realize that he's also magical, and in the end, she leaves him chained up in the woods, and then creatures that we'd seen before, the secrets, basically come to attack Merlin while he's alone. And at first he's trying to use magic to release the chains. However, because Morgause cast a spell on them, he's not able to break through them. And in the end, he ends up using the dragon language to call Kilgara in order to have Kilgara come and save him. It is also revealed on kind of a side note that Morgause is working with Senrid to take over Camelot. That's why Uther has been left weakened. And as Merlin is chained up, having listened to Morgana tell Morgause about Senrid finding Camelot without a leader when he marches on it. We then, at the very last scene of the episode, see, in fact, Senrid marching on Camelot. Or at least the very last scene of part 1 of the episode. We then come to the second half of the episode where Merlin is waking up in a cave that Kilgara has been living in. And he got stung by the Secret. The poison was too great even for his powers. So Kilgara helped him out with his magic and let Merlin sleep. But Merlin's upset that he let him sleep so long because Camelot is in danger. And he ends up getting a ride from Kilgara close to Camelot. Then he returns there. And of course, by this point, Leon and a contingent of knights have seen Senrid's army approaching, and so everybody is preparing. Arthur has assumed some power over the kingdom and has decided that they are going to have basically a siege because the city has never fallen in the past, and so they start bringing in people from the outlying villages and preparing and getting everything ready. Meanwhile, Morgana once again meets up with Morgause, who gives her a Rowan staff to basically use, and Morgana says she's not strong enough, but Morgause reassures her that the staff has kind of a power mind of its own, and so she will be able to utilize it. Obviously, Gaius and Merlin, when he came back, do get rid of the mandrake that's there, which does free Uther, but he does need recovery time, which is why Arthur's still in charge. And then, of course, Senrid begins his attack, and, well, he breaks into the lower town pretty quick, and we have the battle. Morgana's helping Gaius alongside Gwen in the hall with all of the wounded that are coming in. Merlin's out with Arthur. We do see that Uther wakes up from his recovery and then runs out to try to assist in the battle, but Arthur has to pull him back, saying he's got this because Uther is resisting because he's not going to let the kingdom fall on his watch. Meanwhile, Morgana takes advantage of distraction and runs to her room to get the staff. Gaius follows her, but thanks to the staff's powers, he's not able to see her even though she's right next to him. And then he returns. She then goes down to the crypts where she puts the staff into the ground and shining lights come off it, reanimating a bunch of skeletons as Morgause reassures Senrid outside that even the greatest armies can't fight a battle on two fronts. We then have Merlin returning inside, Gaius telling him Morgana's disappeared. He, of course, much like Morgause, feels the Rowan staff start doing its work, so he knows where to find Morgana, so he goes to run after her. And then once they're in the crypts, he first tries to talk her down, telling her, it doesn't have to be this way, you can use magic for good, there's a better way. She refuses to listen, tells him he can never understand, he doesn't have magic, he doesn't know what it's like to be an outsider, and basically starts attacking him with a sword. He brought a sword, so he defends himself, but in the end, he's not really a swordsman, so he ends up having to use his magic subtly to collapse the ceiling on her a bit. He then runs over and cuts the staff in half, which of course ends the enchantment and causes all of the skeletons to fall down onto the ground and disintegrate, which of course gives the Camelot army a second win, allowing them to once again push back Senrid's men. Senrid, seeing that the tides have turned, basically tells Morgause, you said it'd be weakened, it's not weakened, your traitor has failed, we're pulling out, I'm not risking thousands of lives when we don't really have a chance anymore. So he pulls out, to her disappointment. Then we see basically the aftermath where Morgana has taken credit for destroying the staff, and Merlin and her kind of mutually glare at each other while Uther is giving a congratulatory speech to Morgana for being the one to end the spell of with the skeletons. And then, of course, he and Gaius kind of have their little after events little talk when Arthur, of course, comes in to have Arthur comes in to have Merlin continue his role as a servant, and that is where this episode ends. So now that we've been reminded about what happens, it is now time to rank the episode. And as always, we'll be ranking the episode on our mostly objective ranking first, which uses set values to determine the score and is void emotion but does contain occasionally judgment and bias. And then the personal ranking, which uses opinion, entertainment value, and emotional response to pull a score out of thin air based on what I think it deserves. So we'll start with our mostly objective rank values, and I highlighted those I felt applied to this episode. So first we have our multi-episode supporting character introduction, which is King Senrid, who is working with Morgause in order to, in this episode, try to take over Camelot. We then have and that was worth 2 points, sorry. Then we have our multi-season supporting character developments, which is worth 3 points, and that, of course, is that Morgana has been found and returned to Camelot, but is conspiring with Morgause in order to harm Uther with a mandrake. That's 3 points. Then we have some impactful, memorable moments, lines, etc. So there's a lot of compilations of funny moments from the Merlin TV series. And one moment that seems to always make it into almost every compilation, well, there's 3 that kind of happened in this episode that kind of make it into most of those funny moment compilations, which obviously means that they are memorable and obviously had an impact on the fandom, or they wouldn't be in so many of these compilations. And the first one, of course, is when they're on the horses on the way back after managing to find Morgana, and Merlin calls Arthur a dolloped, and then he asks him to define dolloped, and Merlin says in 2 words, Prince Arthur. Then we have the bucket scene where basically after he's told by Morgana that she's forgiven him, Merlin's pretty happy. He finishes all his chores, including washing the floors, but then of course Arthur comes in, walks all over his floors, and Merlin's upset by this, so Arthur decides to tease him a bit, and basically, because Merlin implied he didn't know how to clean himself, he says he can use a bucket and a rag, and he basically takes the bucket that's just been washing the floor, takes out the dirty rag, rubs it all over Merlin's face, and then puts the bucket on his head, which is hilarious and memorable. Okay, it's not hilarious, it's mildly funny. But then we also have, after Merlin gets back from his kidnapping by Morgause and then healing sleep thanks to Kilgara to get rid of the secret poisoning, we then have him walk into the room and it's absolutely chaotic, like a tornado's gone off in there, and Merlin asks what happened, and Arthur says he had to make do without a servant, and Merlin's like, I wasn't gone that long, because it's, and then of course Arthur gets upset and then starts throwing things at him. And I think all of these moments, they're small moments, but they're all very memorable. And they are all little comedic moments that, like I said, tend to come up in pretty much every compilation of funny moments of Merlin that I've ever seen. And so they're worth 3 points as well. We then have worth 4 points our multi-season main character developments. The first one is that Arthur is asked to become regent when Uther is indisposed thanks to Morgana's mandrake poisoning. And then the other one, of course, is that Merlin gets to ride on Kilgara, which is epic because that makes him a dragon rider, as well as a dragon lord. So we enjoyed that, and that's worth 4 points as well. Next, we have our world building elements, which of course is that we learn that in this universe, mandrakes are a magical plant and only magicals can hear their cries. However, on non-magicals, it works to basically invade the psyche, twist the mind, twist the soul, bring about their worst fears, or rather trap them in their worst fears. And this, of course, is the main tool used in part 1. And then in part 2, the main tool used is the Rowan staff, which was carved from a tree in the center of the Isle of the Blessed and has a power of its own that will be able to guide Morgana's magic to achieve the end that they are looking for, which of course is to raise an army of skeletons, so necromancy, in order to force Camelot to fight on 2 fronts to give Senred an advantage to then allow him to take over Camelot, which ultimately, of course, fails thanks to Merlin. And those are all of our positive points. However, we do have some negatives. First negatives are the character regressions, and I felt there were 2 characters that kind of regressed. The first, of course, was Morgana's degradation into her evil self. While she's been gone for the year, she's become bitter, become hateful, become immoral, and basically evil. So, regression, duh. And then the other -1 point is, of course, Merlin. Once again, I feel like in the first few episodes, a series establishes their premise on what the story and characters are, and oftentimes when you're introducing a character, very early on, they kind of establish what they are and the premise behind them. In the case of Merlin, his premise establishment was that he is the strongest magical being of all time, Emrys, who is prophesized to be amazingly powerful, great, bring in Albion's shining era through helping Arthur to become the king everybody knows he can be, etc., etc. And yet every time he faces another magical, his magic is weaker than theirs. Like Morgause, she charms the chains. He's supposed to be the most powerful ever. He has instinctive magic that he's had since he was born, using it before he could even walk. And yet somehow he can't break the chains. Sometimes he can't get rid of the secrets that are coming and attacking him. He does eventually call for Kilgara because he's a dragon lord. In addition, and then it's kind of like you set the premise that he's supposed to be the most powerful ever, so why is it every time he comes up against anybody else's magic, he always loses? And even in this case, he got outside help, Kilgara's help. Now, to be fair, it does stem from his power as a dragon lord, but even so, the very fact that he couldn't break the chains in the first place, when his power is supposed to be the most powerful, I don't know, I find it a bit of a regression. Similarly, when he's, fighting against Morgana, well, he has to keep his power secret from her. So, I mean, I understand why he subtly brought the roof down a bit instead, and then he was able to break the staff, but more so it was that chain scene. I'm like, you're supposed to be the strongest. Why are you not able to break these chains? And even if they were to say, oh, well, Morgause has more knowledge because she was officially trained by priestesses, it's like Merlin's magic was instinctive. Like when he first started, it was instinctive. I'm fairly certain if he let his instincts go and his magic go, he could probably overpower it, or he should be able to, because he's supposed to be the strongest. So I'm still counting it as a -1 point. And then we had our -2s. And we had -2s times 4 of them because there was a lot of negative messaging or behavior going on. So first, of course, we have Morgana's treason. She comes back into Camelot and basically she's plotting to give Camelot to Senred and Morgause. So there was that, always negative. We then had, of course, the mental torture that Uther was put through thanks to the Mandrake, which Morgana takes great pleasure in based on the smirk on her face, and obviously mentally torturing someone, very negative messaging and behaviors, and enjoying it just adds that extra level of ew to it. Then we, of course, have murder. Morgana does murder a sentry who catches her coming back into Camelot with the Mandrake, even though he's only showing concern for her because he mistakes the dripping of the potion off of the Mandrake to be blood. And then, even when he might have survived her stab wound, she then goes and poisons him. So, very intentionally a murderer. Murder is always negative. And then the last one, as compared to the others, relatively mild, but still worth noting. Morgana then steals credit from Merlin, claiming that she was the one to destroy the Rowan staff. And to be fair, she kind of had to because, of course, she was the one who used it. So if she was found in the vicinity because she was unconscious, then, she'd have to come up with some excuse. And why not? I destroyed it now that she's failed, and that still keeps her in a position to do more evil things going forward. So ultimately, she stole credit, and I don't think Merlin was ever going to take the credit, but still a fact she didn't deserve it. But that still leaves us with 14 points, which still leaves this as a 10 out of 10 episode objectively. So, obviously, it's the first episode of season 3, so it is currently first on our list, The Tears of Uther Pendragon. Now we have my personal ranking for the episode, and overall, the episode was entertaining. I do think it started really strongly. Obviously, there were some things that annoyed me. There were some negatives. We can't overlook those. But overall, I felt like it was. Okay, let me start by saying I gave it an 8 out of 10. I gave it an 8 out of 10 because there was a lot of magical effects, which were great. Merlin was using a lot of magic during the battles to fell trees, random branches to trip people up, making people's swords fly out of their hands so that they end up able to be defeated by his side. Things like that, which are always fun. Morgana obviously was using magic as well. I always have loved her wardrobe, so it was nice to see all the pretty dresses again. But of course now Morgana's evil, and I don't mind that she's evil because I think she does evil well, but that doesn't change the fact that, she's doing a bunch of terrible things. And I also, like I said, it really bothers me that Merlin's premise was set up way back in episode 1 as the strongest magical of all time, instinctive magic, doing magic before he could talk, before he could walk, and yet somehow, ever since he started learning magic from his magic book, it's like he's gotten weaker, and it's like he just can't bring himself to fully embrace his magic, and every time there is an evil magic user that uses magic against him, he never seems to be able to overpower their magic, even though his is supposed to be the strongest. And I could understand that with like Mordred or Morgana because they're like, Arthur's destined defeaters, particularly Mordred. But even then, he's supposed to be stronger than them. And the thing that's able to stop them from succeeding to bring about his destiny. So again, like that bothers me. The special effects, I feel like in past seasons they did better. For example, when they had somebody undead, they had them in armor so that you could have like real people inside the armor moving it around, making it look realistic. And it was basically like ghosts in armor. And I felt like that looked way better because I just don't think that they had the budget necessarily for the skeletons because when the skeletons were moving, they looked a bit cartoony. Like a realistic cartoon, like someone was trying to draw a cartoon realistically, but still a cartoon that was trying to mimic realism versus something that actually looks real. The only time they looked real was when it was a pile of bones on the floor, and that's because it was a pile of bones on the floor. So I didn't really enjoy those effects. Obviously, even Merlin riding the dragon, it's like, cool, he's riding the dragon, but really you're just seeing the CGI dragon and him whooping. Like, and then you hear him whooping, so it's implied he's riding the dragon, but you don't actually see it because I don't think the effects were quite there yet. So I do have to take points for that. Honestly, though, I do prefer an evil Morgana. I like all the smirking, the like prancing around so confidently. I do think evil Morgana is better than good Morgana. But of course, she is still doing terrible things, so that has to be considered. And then again, like I said, there was a lot of comedic moments that, end up on the funniest moments compilations almost all the time. And then there was the epic battle, but again, like the epic battle, it was very dark. There was fires in some places, but because it was so dark, it was difficult to see completely what was going on screen, so that also took away from it a bit. Ultimately, what I am trying to say and potentially failing to say is I felt it was a strong episode. I liked the episode, but I can't fully ignore all of the minor flaws that were there, which is why 8 is the score that I'm giving it. A high score, but it's by no means, in my opinion, perfect enough to get a 9 or 10. And of course, it's the first episode, so it is currently in first place, The Tears of Uther Pendragon. And that now brings us to our series rankings so far. And on our mostly objective side, Season 2 is currently in first with 70.83%. Season 1 is in second with 69.23%. And then Season 3 so far has 10 points out of a possible 110. Meanwhile, on the personal ranking side, Season 2 also got first place with 70.83%. Season 1 was in second place with 66.92%, and Season 3 so far is starting with an 8 out of 110. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Merlin Season 3, Episode 1, The Tears of Uther Pendragon. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.